Welcome, and thank you for joining us tonight. My name is Allie Richards, and I'm the CEO of Let's Grow Kids. We're living in a historic time, and the upcoming election is critically important for Vermont's future. We're excited to be thinking expansively around the needs of Vermont and have partnered with the Vermont Chamber of Commerce and Vermont Housing Finance Agency to co-host tonight's nonpartisan forum for candidates for Lieutenant Governor. The Northeast Kingdom Collaborative and Kingdom Trails Association are also participating. Tonight, you will hear from the candidates on 4 issues. 1, the growing need for consistent broadband connectivity. 2, access to high-quality, affordable childcare. 3, access to affordable housing. And 4, investment in rural economic development. All candidates were invited to participate, and we pre-recorded their responses to share with you. Each candidate had the same amount of time to answer each question. Let's get started. Betsy Bishop, president of the Vermont Chamber of Commerce, will ask our first question.
Hi, I'm Betsy Bishop with the Vermont Chamber of Commerce. Vermont is well positioned to be the work-from-home capital of the world, but consistent broadband access across the state is a key to realizing this goal. Nearly 70,000 Vermonters currently lack internet connection or have limited service. This makes working from home, telehealth services, or learning from home impossible. What steps would you take to quickly address the immediate need facing households without sufficient internet access, while also planning for a future that will require increasingly faster internet speeds?
Thank you, Let's Grow Kids, for having me. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in today. My name is Molly Gray. I'm running for Lieutenant Governor. A little bit about me before answering the question, and broadband, of course, is an issue that all of us are dealing with every single day. I grew up in Orange County on a vegetable and dairy farm. I'm a proud product of Vermont's education system. I worked in Washington with our Congressman Peter Welch and around the globe for the Red Cross. And over the last decade, I've served statewide as an assistant attorney general. I've lived and worked in our communities across Vermont, and I'm running for Lieutenant Governor because we're at a crossroads. Not only have we been at a crossroads when it comes to our demographic challenges and keeping a generation here and being able to bring a generation back, but also in responding to this pandemic. And that brings me to the question of broadband. Today in Newberry, where I grew up, 1 in 3 children still can't get online. Something like, as you mentioned, 70,000 homes and residences don't have access to high-speed internet, about 1/4 of our state geographically. And before COVID-19, we knew that we were having a hard time drawing people to Vermont, keeping people in the state, accessing telemedicine, accessing economic opportunity for our business because of this lack of high-speed internet. And then throwing COVID-19 on top of that and this global pandemic that we're in, everything has been laid bare. We know that internet today is access to online learning for our teachers and our students and our families. And so much of Vermont is unable to access that, and it hasn't been since March. We also know that access to the internet promotes access to remote work. And we need to be able to draw people to Vermont and have them be able to work remotely. So our moment, our opportunity is closing this broadband gap once and for all. I think the question is, how do we do it? So we've seen a lot of development with our communication and union districts, setting up around the state, deploying broadband to our rural communities. I think this is our moment to ensure they have the funding they need, and we've seen some of that come through, but working with our federal delegation, we basically need to do a rural electrification, but with internet of Vermont. So I see our most immediate and urgent task being to secure federal funding from our federal delegation, working with our communications union districts, identify the places where we still don't have internet, and work to deploy internet, not only over the coming weeks and months, but in reality, it will take a matter of years, and putting forth a plan together with that funding to be able to do it. But without question, this is one of our greatest opportunities. It's a top priority for me as Lieutenant Governor, working with our legislature, our governor, and our communities.
Great question, Betsy. Good to not really see you, but be with you on this recorded conversation. Appreciate all the Chamber does for Vermont, and Scott Milne, really looking forward to being part of getting Vermont back on track. There's big problems coming as we work our way out of the health crisis that we're in. Everybody that's paying attention realizes that we have a big economic crisis on our hands, and small businesses all over Vermont and all over America are struggling. You're exactly right. Revitalizing rural broadband, expanding rural broadband is a key ingredient in Vermont's recovery. I have a specific plan, Progress VT, which I put out to talk about 60 achievable, not pie in the sky, not bumper sticker slogans, but achievable goals that we can accomplish to make Vermont a more affordable place for families, for children, for retirees, and for folks to prosper. With broadband, it's really important that we expand broadband to rural Vermont. There's a couple specific ways in my Progress VT plan that we've talked about doing this. One is to exempt investments in networking equipment from a sales tax. Vermont's cost of doing business in rural nature makes it obviously very expensive for broadband people to invest here. That's a easy, achievable place that can make a difference. I'd also support better ways to apply existing funds for broadband. For example, the Community Development Block Grant Program allows investment in broadband. These are federal funds, should be used. I look back over the last few years, no CBDG funds have been applied towards broadband. It's something that we should incentivize and prioritize as we go forward. Finally, there's a lot of conversation about communication union districts and that being the way to move forward. When you get into one of these statewide races, you learn a lot about different things. My initial inclination is these communication union districts are very good. However, I do think we need to look at it. It's something I'll be paying a lot of attention to over the next couple of months. Had a sage old Vermonter that I met on the campaign trail telling me, well, Scott, if we let every town decide how the interstate was going to go through their towns, we'd still be talking about it. I think there's an analogy there between communication union districts. It's something we need to pay attention to, but it's a big problem. We've got specific plans in Progress VT. Go to scottmilne.org and learn more. Shoot questions to myself or my campaign team. Would be glad to answer any questions for any Vermont business or Vermont voter.
Hi, I'm Wayne Villager III, and I'm running for Lieutenant Governor as an independent. Thank you for having me. To combat the quasi-monopoly that ISPs have in Vermont, as well as the numerous rural households who cannot get a reliable connection, my administration would treat the internet like the utility it has become. I would jumpstart a state-funded ISP to bring a minimum 95% of those 70,000 Vermonters fast, reliable, and most importantly, cheap internet access. Internet access today is equally important as electricity and therefore should receive the same amount of publicly funded support as other utilities. The main cost that deters the free market from reaching out to people with access is infrastructure. In my opinion, all infrastructure should be publicly funded. That way it gets built when we need it, not just when the market wants to expand its customer base. Funding for the initial infrastructure project as well as other projects would come from my administration's goal of auditing and consolidating all state agencies, hopefully producing a net zero increase of taxes. Beyond this, people would need to be hired to run the ISP as well as build the infrastructure, creating jobs right off the bat. Another key piece of this project is not skimping on the quality of material used. Our infrastructure should be built well enough from the start to limit need for future repairs or upgrades, thus saving taxpayer money in the long run. This, of course, could increase the need for additional funding. I won't try and say otherwise. The state ISP would also create more competition in the state, driving down the cost of internet for people who already have a reliable source. I would also have my administration research alternative methods for getting kids into virtual classrooms faster than this project will allow. I have seen a municipality in Alaska that used television broadcasting to bring lessons into homes faster and cheaper than the internet, which cost parents $0 up front. I can't envision a future where virtual learning isn't a huge part of school, so we must act now to make it easier to reach kids who would be left behind in this new world.
Overwhelmingly, Vermonters believe that childcare is essential. However, even before COVID-19, 3 out of 5 of Vermont's youngest children did not have access to the childcare they need. A recent poll found that 75% of Vermonters support increasing state funding for childcare, and Vermont's Blue Ribbon Commission on Financing High-Quality, Affordable Childcare found that achieving an affordable, high-quality childcare system would require an investment of approximately $206 million per year. What is your vision for Vermont's early care and education system, and how would you propose funding this system?
Allie, I don't think we've ever met, but look forward to meeting you live one of these days, and thanks for the question. Clearly, childcare is one of the most significant challenges Vermont families, especially working moms, have to deal with. COVID-19's made it an even more significant problem for Vermonters. There are common sense steps we can take to increase access, lower costs, help providers and parents alike. Again, my Progress VT plan specifically talks about achievable steps that Vermont can take to make childcare more affordable. First of all, I do want to do a shout out to Governor Scott. I think, the federal money he's using to expand providers and help them stay afloat, I think it's $12 million, although it's hard to keep track of all this money floating around. That's a good step and something that I'm very supportive of. Secondly, Vermont needs to take a careful look at some of the regulations that we have on child care providers, provide more flexibility. Class size ratios and class size caps particularly are something that I've identified as something that can be worked with to make childcare more affordable. Various experts and papers published in numerous journals talk about the childcare ratio as being a key to saving people money without sacrificing the care that their children are receiving. And we need only look to our neighbors in New Hampshire to see this. In New Hampshire, I think a provider can have up to 6 2-year-olds as an example, and there can be up to 18 2-year-olds in a class. Sorry about the shaking dog collar in the back part of Zoom life these days. In Vermont, that ratio is, I think, 5 2-year-olds per, a child care provider and up to 10 in a class. New Hampshire's already done this. New Hampshire families spend, I think, about 13% less on child care. New Hampshire families spend a lower percentage of their income on child care than Vermonters. So it's something that we need to take a serious look at. Thirdly, we need to really take a serious look at smoothing out the benefits cliff for those on the Child Care Financial Assistance Program. Also, when you get in these lieutenant governor races, for anybody who hasn't done it, you get a immersion in alphabet soup of state programs, the CFAT program. The legislature's boosted some funding for this, which is good and something that we should applaud. However, we have this continuing problem where as folks' incomes rise, they hit a benefit cliff, and at the end of the day, they're worse off. It takes away the incentive that's the heart of the American economy, the heart of the history of the American experience. It's something that I'm committed to taking a serious look at if I'm fortunate enough to be elected lieutenant governor.
Like broadband, childcare is also one of the best economic investments we can make as a state. Before COVID-19, as I mentioned, we were struggling to keep a generation in Vermont or draw a generation back. Speaking as or for a generation that has moved away and come back, I want to be able, and I think so many people want to be able to raise their children where they grew up. And that's the beauty of Vermont, right? That's part of what we have to offer. But right now, it's nearly impossible to access universal childcare in communities across the state. What this means practically is that families can't work. Families, especially in a global pandemic such as the one we're experiencing right now, are trying to figure out how to manage online learning from home, paying the bills, keeping a job, and caring for children. We knew that was a challenge before the pandemic, but we know it's even more of a challenge now. So if we're going to draw people to Vermont, if we're going to allow our working families to stay in the workforce and therefore contributing to our economy, which we need to recover, and we need to be able to recover stronger as a state, an investment in childcare is one of the best investments we can make. So the next question is, how do we do it? How do we pay for it? It is a large expenditure, but it is an investment. If we're going to see a return on investment, we have to invest. This is our moment as we come out of this pandemic and we assess our needs, and childcare being one of them, to align our budget with our greatest needs, and putting childcare at the top, putting broadband at the top, putting these investments that are going to help us come out of this stronger. And this may mean we invest less in incarceration. We know that our prison population is down, and invest more in childcare and making sure our providers have what they need, expanding the childcare assistance program, expanding access and the different reimbursement programs to make it accessible, to make it affordable, to make it universal. And at the end of the day, it comes down to equity. We want our next generation and our future leaders and citizens and our children to have equal access to opportunity, and that starts with equal access to opportunity, equal access to childcare. So I see this as one of the best economic investments we can make in this moment, and it all comes down to aligning our budget with our greatest needs.
I have two daughters, one 5 years old, one 11 months old. I know firsthand how difficult it is to find childcare now and before the pandemic started. How can we expect parents to go out and move our economy forward if they cannot find someone to watch their kids? We simply cannot. My campaign is built on starting the war on poverty, which starts and ends with children. Poverty is cyclical in that a child raised in poverty will most likely not be able to break poverty in adulthood. Poverty does not need to exist in the wealthiest country in human history. It is foolish to think we cannot afford to appropriately feed, educate, clothe, and house the families struggling to achieve success in the most prosperous country in this world has ever seen. Specifically, my administration would push for, at minimum, 6 months of paid parental leave for mothers and fathers. The first 6 months of a child's life are crucial to healthy physical and emotional development. Also, being forced back to work can cause unnecessary stress on parents who will most likely be struggling to get a good night's sleep. After that, I believe all childcare needs, including preschool, should be paid for by the state. I'm not against local childcare providers that dot the state, but they should be paid directly by the state to keep childcare costs reasonable and consistent. Our absolute most important investment is the well-being of our children. Every child deserves high-quality food and clean water and education, no matter the financial situation of their parents. Funding for this massive increase in childcare services would partially stem from the taxpayer savings realized by the statewide audit I mentioned earlier, as well as a new universal education tax. My goal with this education tax is to separate education funding from property tax. Many parents rent and do not directly pay into taxes that fund their child's education. Our state has very high property taxes, directly resulting from including education costs, especially for people in Chittenden County. By removing the source of school funding from property taxes, they instantly go down. Revenues, however, will increase because of this tax, as more people would be willing to pay into, or would be directly paying into the funding for schools, creating a much more fair and equitable revenue stream that ensures students from Troy, Vermont have the same access to funding as students from Essex, Vermont.
Next, we will hear from Maura Collins, Executive Director of Vermont Housing Finance Agency.
Hi, I'm Maura Collins. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Housing Finance Agency. We're a statewide affordable housing lender. The state moved quickly to save lives when people who are living in congregate homeless shelters in early March were offered individualized hotel or motel rooms so they could be safe from the virus. This was a brave, yet costly and unsustainable solution. Considering Vermont has a well-documented shortage of homes affordable to many Vermonters, the question now is, what's next for these individuals? How would you address the public health risks facing people without homes, and how would you address their ongoing needs?
My war against poverty fights it wherever it may lie. Those living without a house in Vermont still call the state a home, and we should treat them as such. My administration would create a task force dedicated to affordable housing. Their first task would be to build or purchase a fleet of tiny homes and deploy them into an area suitable for a small village. I would like to have a rent-to-own option available to occupants. A fully equipped tiny home would provide a solid foundation for a person to get back to a stable life without costing much money. Even if they did not choose to work towards the ownership. It is beyond difficult to find reliable employment when you cannot have a shower, wash your clothes, or let alone know where you're sleeping for the night. Housing is the priority here, whether or not the affected person uses it as a temporary solution. After this little community is established, a permaculture initiative would begin. Members of the task force would help teach the community how to work the land for all their resource needs, be it water, food, fuel, or medicine. I would like to imagine an orchard, gardens, and a small herd of animals. So not only would we solve the housing crisis in its current form, but we would teach these people to utilize the world around them in a sustainable, reliable, and resilient manner. In this way, the cycle of poverty would give way to a cycle of community action and development. Another benefit to a community setting like this is the effect it has on people struggling with drug addiction. Typically, drug addiction continues even after rehab because of a lack of community. There's less of a need to escape into drugs if you have a caring, loving people around you and hard work to keep you busy. The task force would also work concurrently with other state initiatives like increasing voter registration and turnout. And then once the task force has successfully jump-started this huge community effort, they would move on to schools to establish the same type of permaculture system. If kids grew up learning how to work the land and live resiliently on it, they would be much better off should they find themselves homeless in the future.
Clearly, affordable housing is a big Vermont problem. It's a national problem. Just want to take a step back and since my purpose here today is to convince you that I'm the best candidate for Lieutenant Governor, want to remind folks that it's just not talk with me. There's walk in affordable housing. A lot of people know me from being in the travel business. Being part of the hospitality industry, retail business, which I think is a skill set I'll bring to Montpelier that's relatively underrepresented and more important in 2021 than ever. But before I got to run for Lieutenant Governor, have some pretty good experience trying to develop a mixed-use commercial and housing project in Hartford, Vermont. We've got a unanimous approval with the Hartford Town Planning Commission. We had 160 units of housing approved as part of that plan unit development. 10% of that would have been affordable housing if we had actually gotten an Act 250 permit. If you do some research, you'll see we did not get the Act 250 permit. So I know what I'm talking about. I think it's something that I can bring to the party. Specifically with your question this morning, if you go to my Progress VT plan, we have very specific proposals on what we can do to help affordable housing get going. Clearly, the down payment assistance program is scheduled to be a sunset. This is a state program that's enabled about 1,000 people to buy a home. It's something that we need to put some more money into and make sure it does not go away. Secondly, the priority housing projects, or PHPs, are important, is an important tool that we can use, and it's something that talk a lot about in the Progress VT plan, which will be a helpful part of solving this problem. Thank you very much.
Vermont also is suffering a massive housing crisis. We know that that is the case in Burlington, certainly, and in Chittenden County, where there simply isn't enough accessible, affordable housing. For those who are experiencing homelessness, we've seen this extensively over the last several months. But I think it's important to take a step back and look at what we're experiencing around the state. In Orange County, where I grew up, where we see more deaths than births, we see a declining population. There's housing that is becoming available, but it's not safe, it's not weatherized, it's not accessible for many people, especially some of our older Vermonters. In Southern Vermont, we do see innovative projects where our downtowns and cities and municipalities have done renovation projects, like the Putnam Block Project, for example, in Bennington, to have housing that's in our communities, that's accessible to transportation. It's also accessible to different families from different backgrounds and different incomes. I think we have to take a holistic look at the state of housing in Vermont right now and realize that the housing needs and challenges of Burlington may be different than the housing needs of Orange County or Bennington County, but recognize at the end, access to housing is access to security. It's a roof over one's head. It's the ability to care for family. It's the ability to access a job. It's linked to basic health and safety. And as I said, when it comes to broadband and childcare, it all comes down to aligning our budget and our priorities as a state with our greatest needs. And for me, and as the future Lieutenant Governor of Vermont, I would want to see us continue to put our families, our communities at the forefront and put people before politics, and making housing an area where we understand that housing is a basic human right and that it's accessible to all Vermonters.
Our last question comes from Abby Long, Executive Director of Kingdom Trail Association.
My name is Abby Long, and I'm the Executive Director of the Kingdom Trail Association, and I also serve as a board member for the NEK Collaborative. I consider myself so fortunate to live in the stunning Northeast Kingdom of Vermont. Although comprised of the least populous, least densely settled counties in a state with one of the most rural populations in the entire country that is also experiencing a population in decline, the recreation, creative, and food sectors have proven to be strong drivers of the regional economy. They exemplify the Vermont brand and lifestyle, and even provide experiences that are attractive to working age individuals and families like myself. Pre-COVID, Kingdom Trails alone had an annual impact of over $10 million as we experienced 135,000 visits in 2019 to our 100 plus miles of trails that are made possible by generous private landowners. And I am hoping our candidates may discuss potential policy changes or initiatives they would advocate for that would encourage investment and further infrastructure in outdoor recreation, creative arts, and food to continue sustainable economic growth in our rural region.
This is a tough issue to solve, and it is one that affects Vermont as a whole. Vermont has seen a decline in population over the last decade. Younger people move away to find more opportunities, and older people move away to find lower taxes and more affordable housing. It is increasingly more costly to live here because of this. Less people means higher tax burden per person. I've already mentioned my plan for increasing broadband access to rural Vermont, which would alleviate one stressor. The education tax I proposed would also help out here. Students in the NEK would receive the exact same funding as students in other parts of the state while lessening property tax. Unfortunately, the pandemic isn't going away soon, but it won't hold us down forever. Once we can move past COVID-19 safely, my administration will start work on a massive public transportation project. The goal is a high-speed, all-electric public transit system similar to the projects currently in the works by the Boring Company. Method aside, increasing the speed and reducing the cost of traveling to and from the NEK and other rural parts of Vermont would increase tourism and save commuters money. Not only would revenue increase from more accessible public transport, but carbon emissions, traffic, and traffic-related crashes would all decrease. The cost savings would also directly translate to regular commuters, as any public transport system I sponsor would be free to the end user. Think of all the costs associated with commuting in Vermont: car payments, insurance, registration, taxes, inspections, and repairs. Having fast, efficient, environmentally sustainable public transport is absolutely necessary for Vermont's future. The limiting factors to this type of project are initial costs, which would be high, and time, which would be limited. With only a two-year term as governor or lieutenant governor, it would be very difficult to get such a project started. Should I see a second term, all the groundwork laid for this project would allow us to move forward and begin building a better Vermont.
We're at a crossroads. I mentioned earlier that our demographics are changing. We have to figure out how to draw people to Vermont. And so often we talk about paying people $10,000 to move to this beautiful state, when in fact we have thousands of young farmers and food producers that are leading the food systems movement nationally, right here from Vermont. We see our ski areas and four-season recreation industry diversifying, being extremely entrepreneurial. I was just up at the rail trail in Lamoille riding an electric bike this weekend. And it's incredible to see the ways that our trails are developing, and we're creating more inclusivity, allowing more and more people to get out on a bike, to ride through our farmlands, to see the natural beauty that we have here in Vermont. And the truth is, we have adapted as a state with this pandemic. We trusted the scientists, we've worn our masks, we've done everything that we can as a community to take care of each other. But when it comes to climate change, we're still a little bit hesitant to take bold action. And I think what we know from talking to our ski areas, what we know from talking to our farmers and our health experts, is that we see the impact every single day. So if we're going to be a diverse, resilient, sustainable economy in Vermont for the future, we have to think about how do we transform? So investing in the rail trail, investing in Kingdom Trails, investing in opportunities that allow for a green economy, that allow for recreation that is more diversified. We can't rely on man-made snow every single winter. And the same goes with our food system, strengthening Vermont's agricultural economy. So we have local resilient food systems that are present now, but I think there's more we can do to end our reliance on food coming necessarily out of the state and to really bolster the food systems that are here. And we are creative. And the story of Vermont that we don't often tell is a story, as I said, of our young farmers and food producers, of our 30 co-working spaces, of our 7 young professionals, professional networks statewide. We have so much innovation, we have so much creativity, and I see it as the opportunity of the Lieutenant Governor, or the platform of the Lieutenant Governor, as one where we elevate the voices of our businesses, we elevate the voices of our creative economy, of our farmers, and try to bring them to the table as we think about telling a new story of Vermont that is going to continue to drive changes to policy, be it reforms to Act 250 that allows for development to occur in a way that's modernized, and it's an antiquated law as it stands. Again, I think action on climate change is extremely important, but really bolstering a diversified economy for the future. So I will leave it there, but there's so much we can do and so many stories like Kingdom Trails that are not being told about Vermont.
Thanks very much for the question. One of the 10 planks in Scott Milne's Progress VT plan is revitalizing rural Vermont. And one of the key pillars of that plank is leveraging our outdoor economy. Specific proposals there, I'd invite you to go to scottmilne.org, look at Progress VT and see for yourselves. There's 3 specific proposals there that I'd like to talk about in the couple minutes we have this morning. First of all, we need to really leverage our outdoor economy, and you in the Northeast Kingdom are exactly who I'm talking about when we came up with this proposal for improving the optimism of Vermonters and the likelihood of Vermonters being able to live, raise a family, retire, and prosper here. We need to remove Act 250 oversight from recreational trails. That Victory Trail project in Northeast Kingdom is the poster child for what's gone wrong with that. Specific proposal to do that. Secondly, we need to support farmers. Farmers are a vital part of our outdoor economy. It goes hand in hand with outdoor trails. Farmer accessory businesses on farms, forcing farmers to get permits to give tractor rides or, be part of this, home to farm kind of, new economy for tourism is something that we need to take a look at and remove red tape from. And third, we need to establish enterprise zones so that rural parts of Vermont, a lot of parts in the Northeast Kingdoms fall under this umbrella, get priority as far as economic development going there, so that the economic development that does happen can happen in the right places and enable the rural economy in places like the Northeast Kingdom, places like Bennington County, all over Vermont thrive. Something I'm looking forward to working on as your Lieutenant Governor. We put a lot of thought into how the outdoor economy fits into our overall economy and into all the attractions of Vermont. I invite you to take a look at Progress VT. reach out to me personally or anybody on my campaign if you want more information. Thanks very much for the question and your time today.
Thank you for joining us for this candidate forum. We're so glad that you tuned in, and we hope that you'll share what you heard tonight with your friends and family so we can all be informed. Finally, please be sure to vote so that your voice is heard in this election. Good night.